Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Wolf von Laar, who is the CEO of studentsforliberty.org. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are an international network that is working with students who are interested in the idea of liberty. And if you're new here into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to explore many topics within liberty, like the importance of free markets, free speech, so we can together build a free future. And I'm very grateful that Wolf took the time to speak with us today. So, hi Wolf, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Emil.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time. So, how would you describe Students for Liberty to someone that is not familiar with the work that you do?
Absolutely. Students for Liberty is an international organization in which we empower young people, students, mostly university students, to pursue their own projects, their own goals. So to give you an idea, our students in the last year alone, that was a little bit pre-COVID times as well, but they organized 2,255 events with over 115,000 people attending those events.
Wow.
And at those events, they're discussing topics like philosophy, economics, what benefits human beings, like how do we live in a better and more equal and more just world. And our students happen to believe that this is mostly due to institutions that allow human beings to be free. So free markets, free speech, smaller government. But of course, many of these ideas are a little bit contentious and you have to have debate over them. And so these students are building a platform and pursuing their own goals within that. But the crucial thing really is that you can find people with the same pin that I'm wearing in over 100 countries that believe in the same kind of ideas. And it's really fascinating to see this journey and to empower young students to organize, for instance, an event with 100 people for the first time. They stand in front of on a podium and talk to the audience. And that gives them not only the theoretical understanding of the ideas because they talk about it, but more importantly, they're doing the work themselves. And they become better leaders in the process of that. And I'm also a product of the organization. And I used to run events with over 300 people that I organized with only a handful of students that were passionate about this. I got to raise 50,000 euros as a young 20-year-old, and I got to really get experiences that I would have never received in a university or an internship program. And I'm very grateful for that. And now I'm privileged to work with over 60 staff members on every inhabited continent to help other young people to have the same experience and realize like, oh, I can do these things. And I can maybe organize a startup incubator and invite like business people and bring them together in Stockholm and talk about ideas that I care about. And so, yeah, it's a nonprofit, and I really feel good about the future of humankind. And I know that that is the theme that you are touching on in this podcast, which I'm very grateful that you're spreading positivity during a time where if you switch on the news, it's all very negative.
I'm getting energized just hearing you speak. So I would love to talk more about positivity later. But first, I just want to tie back to what you say that the work that you do, I find it highly important. I wish that was not something a organization like you were doing. I wish those debate took place in school as well, because it's such crucial questions to the quality of human life. So I appreciate that you empower students and inspire them to be creative and take action and go for creating the future that they would like to see. So before I ask about the positive things that are happening, what are kind of the challenges that you're going through to reach the students?
You already pointed out the main one. Most people don't hear in school or in university about the benefits of property rights or exchange and prices. Most people say like, all of these corporations, they're abusers, they're greedy, banks are taking our money, and many of those stories are true. I'm not trying to defend like big corporations or businesses. And very often they are in bed with government and they're getting like privileges they would not have in a supposedly free market. And we're always living in a market which is like partially free. It depends what country you're talking about. Partially free, partially full of government. But most people are very skeptical about this, and they perceive more markets like dog eat dog kind of mentality. And they don't see that over the last 300, 400 years since the Industrial Revolution, even before that, the explosion of wealth and the accessibility to fresh water, electricity, having a mobile phone, which most of the world has now within a very short time span, all of these things are possible because of free markets and price mechanisms. So, and people don't talk about it, and it takes time to understand these principles. And it seems like that in most countries, the role of government and that they want to help most people is much more highlighted than the benefits of markets. So I think that's the main obstacle. And it mostly takes people looking out for ideas themselves. So in my case, I was more like middle of the road. I was like a little bit liberal in the European sense, but not too much. And I didn't really have a foundation in ideas, like the principles, like what are the things that make me believe that free markets are better. I had like a knee-jerk reaction, but I didn't really have explanations for it. But then the financial crisis of 2008 happened. And you probably remember, but the discourse was very much like, it's the fault of capitalism, it's the greed of the bankers. And again, I'm skeptical of bankers, and I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. We can talk about that if you're interested, because I think that's one of the most positive developments around that will actually bring power back to the people and get it away from like huge banks and central banks and so forth. But that's a side comment. But once I saw this explanation, I felt a little bit simplistic, and I started to read authors like Friedrich von Hayek or Henry Hazlitt. And they wrote fantastic books. They gave me like a completely different understanding how I could look at the world. And I became intellectually addicted. It was my first addiction intellectually. And I started reading everything. And I wrote like a little book about why central banks might be not very beneficial, why it leads to inequality, why it leads to huge problems in the economy and creates a lot of losers and a lot of like very rich people. And yeah, I think the main challenge is to have these conversations, have them in a respectful way, because many people have very strong beliefs about them. And it's sometimes tough to have respectful discourse because our own ideology is very interwoven with our beliefs and who we are. So if somebody attacks my beliefs, it's not that I rationally can counter them. It's just like, oh, that's a good argument, it's a bad argument. It feels like an attack against myself. And that's how we human beings are mostly wired. So it's sometimes difficult to have these intellectual conversations. But that's the reason why we're teaching young people to really, even if they're passionate about them, that they're also very respectful and trying to listen to the other side before they just say like, hey, you have to read this book and like slap them over the head with it. Because that's not like a good way of facilitating civil discourse, which is so much needed this day and age, especially here in the United States where I live, because what's happening in Congress and here happens on the streets is a reflection of what happens on campus as well. But that would be the main challenge.
Yeah, and from that point of view, I really see the importance of facilitating the discourse, because like you say, it's not a easy topic. It takes years of studying and discussing, and to be able to do that and put in the effort, there needs to be a group, I think, so people can encourage each other. So yeah, I'm happy you're creating this kind of network. And like there are so many interesting topics to me that I would like to hear you about, and we only have 20 minutes. But I'm really curious to hear from your point of view, what should be a healthy role for a government? And maybe if you could tie in there, like how Bitcoin plays into that as well, because I guess they are somewhat interconnected.
Fascinating question. So the interesting thing from my ideology, and people would call it in the United States libertarianism, but I prefer the term classical liberal because it shows more of the history, because classical liberalism exists for like centuries. And we as classical liberals would never say we have the best idea how society should look like. which is very different from most people on the left or most people on the right. They know how society probably should look like. You should have like a welfare state, and it should be like this big, and everybody should have like, they have a very clear vision, and they know that if you put the right experts in charge, then it would be all perfect. Classical liberals, on the other hand, think that society is so complex and we have to rely on human ingenuity and trial and error to continue to improve things. And not only improve them within markets, but also about how we run government and bring innovation to that as well. And I know that Sweden is a smaller country, and you went through like a trial and error phase. You used to have like a huge welfare state, and at some point it collapsed. It was way too big. You couldn't afford it anymore. And then you now have like a model which is giving money from the government, but it has different private businesses competing for those things. And healthcare is significantly better compared to like other countries who don't have that. So you're like leaner, you're faster, and you have experimented with that. And classical liberals generally believe if you have like smaller government entities that compete with one another and allow people to choose, that would lead to better checks and balances than like a massive government that regulates everything and has the best idea how society should be structured, right? And that is a fascinating and very rich topic to explore. Let me try to give you an example. So for instance, you could imagine a scenario where when the internet came about, it's only like for 20, 30 years where it's like really accessible for a lot of people. It was scary, and people were creating a lot of angst about the internet. Oh, it would only be used for pornography and illegal activities, and people would be buying drugs or whatever. And the same kind of fear was created when electricity came about. People said like, why do you want electricity in your home? Because it will burn your house down. We have gas that could come into your home, like, and houses have burned down. And they started to regulate that and tried to hamper it. And the already existing businesses tried to fight against it and use the government to fight against electricity. Same thing with the automobile. Actually, in the UK, they had a law at the beginning of the automobile that every car needed to have 3 people operating it. 1 person was steering it, 1 person had to fire the engine or whatever it was, and 1 person had to walk in front of the car to warn all of the different horse carriages, be careful, like a car is coming. So these regulations, they try to destroy this, but innovation, if people really see that, is often cannot be put in place. You can regulate it very thoroughly, and you can try to break it, and it's have happened. But if, again, like another country allows that, then people will just accept it. And now horse carriages are gone, even though there was like all of this fear that it would never work. And I think classical liberals generally would say, smaller government, trust in human beings, set up the good rules that allow human beings to interact in a positive fashion. Of course, don't allow any kind of violence and all of these sorts of things. That needs to be punished with institutions as well, but trust more in people. And that is different. And that is a good segue to your other questions, how Bitcoin speaks to that. Bitcoin is fascinating. And I'm talking about Bitcoin specifically, not the 8,000 other cryptocurrencies that exist, because there's so many of them. And I believe it's a waste of time to study all of them. But Bitcoin takes out the power of money and banking out of the hand of government and of banks. If you own Bitcoin and you have your own wallet, you can send Bitcoin to anyone at any time. You can set even your own transaction fees. What you now need a bank for, like if, for instance, if I want to send you money, Emil, you live in Stockholm, I live here in Arlington, it would probably take like 15 days to change some digital numbers on your bank account and change some digital numbers on mine. And I cannot go to them after 5 p.m. And if it's like 3 p.m. here, your banks are already closed. And it's such an archaic system that doesn't empower people. And we rely on all of these institutions. And it's fine for you and me, right? Because we have banks, we have credit cards, like nobody uses cash in Sweden. But what about somebody in, let's say, Belarus? They shut down most of international transactions when the protests were happening, right? The government and the banks work together in order to say like, no, we are not letting money come in order to support these people that are just trying to fight for their liberty. And as we know, Belarus, like they've tortured people, they have raped men and women in prison. We had students there that fought for this and have been in prison several times, and these stories are atrocious. But Bitcoin allowed actually to not ask anyone for permission and just sent Bitcoin from one place to another, exchanged it in local currency, and were able to buy like supplies. And right now there's 1.7 billion people, 1.7 billion people that are underbanked, meaning they don't have regular or no access to banking. They cannot take out a loan, they cannot take out a mortgage, and that really hampers them. And I believe that Bitcoin empowers these people, and it's still very early. Bitcoin is only around for 12 years, but it has grown already tremendously. That right now estimates go that over 103 million people are using it worldwide. Plus, also, it allows us to find, and then I shut up because I will talk like 30 minutes about Bitcoin. It's also store of value because it's fundamentally scarce. There will be never more than 21 million Bitcoin. It's part of the protocol. It's fixed. Now, gold is extending, paper money is extending all the time, and people are losing their purchasing power. We see this around us all the time. Inflation is a real thing. Your parents could have bought like a house for like a third of the price that you have to buy a house for right now. And I know especially difficult in Stockholm as well. And it's real, but you can park your money in Bitcoin. Yes, it's volatile, but there will never be more. So it's like the only truly scarce asset in the world. And I sleep better that my wife and we are owning some, so that cannot be taken away from us easily. And it cannot be inflated away like the dollar or the euro.
Mm. Yeah, I see the interconnectedness of the role of government and Bitcoins. And I see also how important Bitcoin is going to be to counter authoritarian governments to be able to bring supplies and stuff to places where liberty is trying to be shut down. So what is the development then? You spoke of Belarus, but we also spoke before this interview about countries like Venezuela, the Democratic Republic of Congo. What is happening there?
Generally, the world becomes freer and people have more access to technology and have access to cell phones. And we need to acknowledge these positive trends. But of course, there are many pockets around the world where you have very strong dictatorships, and where, in the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo, people can shut down the internet when elections come up, and they have done that. But we have, for instance, one story that is really, really amazing, and it's touching. We had a student there, or we have a student there. His name is Aimable. And he came to us and was interested in the same ideas and talked about money and the economy and philosophy and how we can help the environment also, and all of these interesting topics. And he organized within 1 year events for 2,000 people in Congo, in Botswana, and I think Burundi. And he is originally from Burundi. It's also the country that I think has a GDP per capita of like $292 per person per year.
Wow.
That's basically what we spend like in a month on Amazon, right? That's what they have available. So very poor. He learned through all of these activities he did with us skills, and he became more confident, and he wanted to change his country. And what he did recently with his think tank that they had, he was able to change the filing fee to start a new business. That was like $70. And he reduced it to $24 with his like lobbying efforts, if you will. And this is just a thing of beauty. In Sweden, it's perfect. Like you can start businesses so easy. That's the reason why it's like a very entrepreneurial environment, right? But there, it's not. But now thousands of more people can start their own businesses. And for the first time, support their families and support like with the goods and services their fellow humans in Burundi. And that's just like a so small story, but it's like one individual and his network have accomplished that. And so that gives me hope that like small incremental change will at some point allow more and more people to have access to the same kind of privileges that you and I have access to. In terms of Venezuela, I mean, they're royally screwed, but there's still people fighting for these ideas, and they're brave. And right now, you can hear stories and read stories about, going back to Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is often like the only way that some of them survive, because they can use some of the money, and like the next day the money will be only worth half of it. And you can see the pictures of people like carrying out money in troves, like because it's not worth anymore. People make like baskets out of money to sell them because the money is worthless. And so many people park their money now on Bitcoin and are able to transact internationally again without any permission. And as a matter of fact, more Bitcoin is traded in Venezuela every single day than the total value of the Venezuelan stock market.
Wow.
And so this technology often allows people to escape if the institutions have become so worse that life has become unbearable and even make people die at a very young age because they don't have access to food or medicine or even toilet paper sometimes in those events. And it started off similar with the same kind of populism that we see now in the US and in many European countries as well, where they said like, oh, money is free, we can just print it all the time, it doesn't matter, like just increase the debt all the time and we just print some more. And that, I think, is a very scary narrative. And the more people think about this and see that their money is deteriorating and feel that they're like poorer maybe than their parents, maybe that is a wake-up call to question that politicians can always spend more money and that there's no consequences. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And I hope that we can adjust the behavior of government and make it a little bit smaller, more responsible before we will like have another massive crisis.
I wish I could ask you 10, 20 more questions, but we're coming up towards the end of this interview. And I'm curious what someone that is listening to this as an individual can do to be a part of a freer future.
Fantastic question. I would encourage them to subscribe to your channel and to learn more about New Ideas and other organizations that are doing great work. I would encourage people to start reading more about these things, and maybe especially the Swedish audience. Johan Norberg is a fantastic author who wrote fantastic books in Swedish, but also in English. Johan Norberg. I think it's like one book is about capitalism. If you Google Norberg and capitalism, I think it would be a great introduction, like why capitalism might be good. So open your mind, maybe look at the arguments from the other side. Even if you happen to be already like classical liberal libertarian, try to learn from the other side as well. Be open-minded. And if you want to become engaged, go to studentsforliberty.org, go to our YouTube channel. We have over 45 million views. Learn Liberty, it's called, Learn Liberty on YouTube. And start learning about these things and read some authors. I would encourage Henry Hazlitt, Hazlitt, or maybe also the French economist, Frédéric Bastiat, Bastiat. What is seen and what is unseen. Very good books, and just start reading, learning, and anyone, just respect the other side, try to open your mind, have the respectful discourse. We are all trying to work towards a better world, and we just have to have good conversations about what are the institutions and tools and ideas that get us to a more prosperous society.
Beautiful. Wolf, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today. I highly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. And for you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that will show the algorithms that this interview is important, so more people can learn how we can have freer markets, more Bitcoins, and in general, a freer future. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. What is Great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is Great.com to learn more.